Good evening, everybody. This is Professor Mani, welcome you on behalf of the Bombay Management Association. Welcome to our 29th edition of the Wednesday Wisdom Webinar, an initiative that BMA took up right in April when we realized that lockdown was imminent. Delighted to share that over these weeks, we've had several illustrious speakers joining us to share their wisdom on several topics of interest, both individual and corporate. Today, we are delighted that with the support of ICB, Pune, and thanks to the introduction done by our former president, Mr. Ashok Sharma, we have this joint program with ICB. The topic for today is how to create value by building trust. And I think this is something which all of us have realized is the hallmark of any successful organization, and today perhaps has been demonstrated amply by so many corporates who stood the test of time, fought the battle of Corona, at the same time protected the interests of their employees at every given point in time. We have someone here with us who perhaps justifies this entire definition of how to create value by building trust. Mr. Farhad Forbes is our distinguished speaker for the day, and I thank Colonel Alan Burby from ICB for having facilitated this entire interaction with Mr. Farhad Forbes. Most of us would know that Mr. Forbes is the co-chairperson of Forbes Marshall. Besides that, he is also the chairman of a worldwide body called the Board of Family Business Network International. An engineer from Stanford who went on to do his management from Sloan, Mr. Forbes is well known for his innovative and heartwarming management initiatives. And it is some of these that he is going to share with us today as part of the discussion. He's currently also the chairperson of a committee of CII on affirmative action. Who better than this evening to share with us wisdom on how to create trust so that one can build value. Over to you, Mr. Forbes, and we are indeed obliged to you on behalf of BMA for making time this evening to address our members. Thank you very much, and over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Mani. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Alan and Mohan from ICB for inviting me to join you this afternoon. As Professor Mani mentioned, he requested me to speak about creating value by building trust. As organizations, we deal with many different stakeholders. And when we talk about trust, you can talk about building trust with all stakeholders. So whether that be employees, whether it be your contractors and their employees, customers, vendors, other businesses who may not be customers nor vendors, but which are part of your ecosystem, part of your city communities, your national committees, national communities. And then, of course, finally, the community itself in which you operate, and government and statutory authorities as well. So these are, various stakeholders that we as organizations come into contact with and which we have to constantly deal with. Some, of course, more closely than others. I'd like to mention two important elements of trust first, before using some examples of how one can build trust with these different stakeholder entities. First, it's a two-way benefit that is derived. If you earn the trust of your employees, your vendors, or your community, your organization also benefits. So there's an indirect organizational benefit. I'm not suggesting that that should be the motivation to build trust, but I'm saying that's the indirect benefit that one derives if you are in a position to earn the trust. And I emphasize the word earn the trust of these various stakeholders. And secondly, when in times of crisis, trust really becomes all the more critical. And I think we have a classic example right now, as in these past 7 months, where we've all had to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. And we've had a very serious crisis, a crisis which has affected every country in the world. The scale at which it has affected us in terms of the impact on health, impact on economic prosperity. It's been a devastating crisis. So in the rest of these few minutes that I'm going to speak right now, we will focus on building trust with employees, with contractors, with customers, vendors, and other businesses, and the community. I'm going to talk a little bit about that and use a few examples, particularly with regard to our own personal experiences during these past 7 months, as we've sort of encountered things on a changing basis, literally day to day sometimes. So I'd like to talk about why it's important and also what's involved in building trust, and then the indirect value which one derives as a result. So let's start with employees. First, why is it important to build trust? And I think all of us, who are from organizations will agree that we all want a committed, engaged workforce. We want to see happy employees, and we want to create an environment which is a good place to work for members who work for us. We want to see low attrition. And the reason for that is that the cost of attrition far exceeds the cost of retention. If you think about it, if you lose people, lose your experienced people, the cost of replacing those people is far greater often than whatever efforts and whatever monetary cost there is to retain people. And retention of people comes not just from monetary benefits, providing higher salaries, but it's how you interact with people, how you deal with your people, how you build trust with people, your own members. It's also important because you want to see trusted relationships, but also with accountability, and recognizing that accountability is also two-way. Not only do we need our team members to be accountable to us, but we as managers and leaders are also accountable to our teams, to our team members. And we need to make sure that our team members are successful and they depend on us to be successful. We want to see empathy. We want to see care and respect in our organizations. And finally, we need to live our values to make our culture come alive. I'd like to just share some personal examples of building trust with our own members in our own organization. Of course, over the years, but particularly how that sort of came out and came to life during these last 7 months, during the pandemic. Obviously, when we were hit with this crisis in March, it came on so suddenly that we had to deal with things pretty much on a day-to-day basis and make changes as you went along day to day. When right from the time of the first initial lockdowns, and then working through the lockdowns as the lockdowns were extended, and then gradually getting people back to work, getting operations restarted, and then operating in an environment where today you can at least have manufacturing working, but how do you keep people safe when you have the virus far from being sort of contained? So the first thing we had to do was to make sure that everyone was safe. Not only that our own members were safe, our own employees were safe, but their families were safe as well. And this was during the lockdown and after manufacturing restarted. So what we did was we set our own protocols for who comes to work and who does not. We could go by what the authorities would say, but as you all know, there was a lot of confusion. In the initial days, we had a very draconian lockdown, the most strict lockdown that any country in the world had. And we yet had to find ways to get operations started in as small, in as effective a way as possible, without compromising on the safety of our people. So as I said, we established our own protocols in terms of how many people should be in the office, how many should not. And that depended very much on what the national scene was. When I say national scene, I really mean the community in which we are operating. So the city of Pune, which is where I'm located, where our plants are located. And then also within the plants itself, within the organization itself, in terms of how many cases we would have at any point in time, which would then allow us to put in more restrictions or less restrictions in terms of how to manage the people coming to work. We did our own contact tracing, and we continue to do all our own contact tracing, not only for our employees, but for the families as well. So in the event that someone in a particular, one of our members, family members who lives in the same household becomes positive, then dealing with that, ensuring that firstly the person is safe. Is it possible for the person to isolate at home? Do we need to find a hospital bed? All of those things. So we've sort of maintained active records of all the people the individuals were in contact with, and ensured that any of our members who either were positive themselves or had family members who were positive, the circle that they were operating in, we would quarantine them, make sure that they were tested, and only then would allow them to come back to work, and made sure that when they did come back to work, they were entirely safe and well. We had to do a lot by way of organizing transportation from people's hometowns during the initial lockdown. As you know, there was total chaos at that time because the lockdown was announced with 4 hours notice. And so people were caught in between places. So we had to organize for people to get either back to their homes or get back to Pune, where they were stationed and where they were working. So there was a lot of issues of getting police permissions and health permissions and all of that. We created our own dormitories where we provided lodging and boarding facilities for our manufacturing members. So we converted space in our factories, our training halls, we put in beds, we built showers so that people could live there, all of that. And then we also built our own isolation center, because we could see, this was done sometime in the month of July, we could see that the cases in Pune were going to increase substantially. We also recognize that in our, in our homes, the way we live, many of our families live together. There are many generations, sometimes 2 generations or 3 generations living together. And it's not always possible for people to self-isolate. And so we felt that we should build our own isolation facility. So we have 10 rooms, which are on our premises, where in the event person is either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, they can safely isolate in our own premises. So that's as far as safety was concerned. The second thing, of course, is at a time like this, there's a lot of stress because everyone's dealing with this for the first time. And so at a time like this, frequent communication and communication with both authenticity and transparency, and I emphasize those 2 words. The communication has to be authentic, because just saying that, well, we'll get over it, everything is fine, that's not good enough. People don't believe you if you tell them that. You have to tell them honestly that you don't have answers, that this is a crisis that we're dealing with, but we will deal with it as well as possible, that we will support you as well as possible, and that together we will come through it. But not to say that there will be no pain, there will be no concerns. There will be a lot of that, but we will work through it and go through it together. And then one has to be transparent. So with the authenticity has to come transparency, where you present the facts, you present where, at a national level, the figures that are coming out in terms of number of cases, etc. We present that every morning to our members, and also the health of the company. What's the cash flow position? What's the order position? How is invoicing happening? So that people know and people understand where we are and how we're doing generally. And we've started this by way of I think we started on the 19th of March, because Pune went into lockdown even before the rest of the country went into lockdown. So from the 19th of March, every single day except Sundays, we have a call. We call it a catch-up call. So we do it with all our senior managers, and our managers in turn do it with all their team members. So every day there is a call so that every member of the organization is reached, where you discuss exactly what I just mentioned in terms of the health of the company, where we stand, where the respective team stands, etc. We have been having regular town hall meetings, so where with senior management, you have all the employees of the company on a VC. The technology exists today, which allows you to do it. So whether it's Zoom or any of these other platforms, it allows us to do that. And during these town hall meetings, we've also had some of our doctors present, who can then answer questions as well. So there's a lot of dealing with both work situations, dealing with family situations, and dealing with the overall health situation. Those are the things which are on people's minds, and that's what is essential to be able to address, to be able to allay any fears, allay any concerns that people have, and at the same time motivate them, because in times of crisis, it also brings out the best in people. And if we've seen great examples of significant amounts of creativity, full engagement, and sometimes we have in all organizations, we have silos and barriers between people, between departments, between functions. And honestly, I would say during this period, most of that went away. And we really had people come together in a very sort of spirit of cooperation to address all the challenges the crisis has brought on. I'd like to talk a little bit about not just our own employees, but also contractors, because in India, in our country, many of our organizations work through contractors as well. So whether they are direct contract employees who are employed by our companies, or whether they are employed through contractors. So whether it's your garden staff, whether it's your security, your housekeeping, there's a huge number of people who are in some way or other dependent on us. And during the initial lockdowns, we felt that it was essential to not just take care of our own employees, but it was necessary to also engage with our contractors, ensure that our security staff, our canteen staff, our housekeeping staff, even though they were not our own employees, were paid, that they were safe, that they still had a place to stay. We had, this is part of the migrant labor problem, which, everyone is aware of, that we had a serious problem in the country in the early days of the lockdown, because many of them lost their jobs overnight. They were unable to pay their rent, so they were thrown out of their places of residence. And in some cases, many didn't have food to eat as well. So at least we wanted to see that, could we make sure that we were not adding to that problem, and that people who were in some indirect way connected with us were at least secure and that they were safe. So we sort of ensured that our contractors were paid, but we also made sure, and we got assurances from them when we actually checked to see that the contractors were in fact paying their own staff. Moving on, we talking about vendors. Here too, if you look at the motivation, why do you need to build trust with vendors? I mean, it's very obvious that we want to see long-term relationships. So whether it's with customers or vendors, we want to see long-term relationships rather than purely transactional, case-to-case relationships. The same logic applies to retaining good employees. The cost of a new customer, cost of a new vendor far exceeds the cost of retaining an old vendor or an old customer. Repeat business is much easier to get from a customer than trying to secure a new order. And if you can capitalize on an existing relationship with a vendor, you usually get a better deal as well. So preserving long-term relationships and building trust with both customers and vendors certainly benefits the organization as well. So during the crisis, we got in touch with our vendors. We had vendor meets. We asked for their help. We asked for their help on deliveries, both whether it came to deferment of deliveries, supplies from them, and also advancement. Because obviously when the crisis took place, our own customers had change in plans. So there were some projects which were put on hold, for which we had placed orders with our vendors. And so we had to get back to our vendors and ask for their support to defer supplies to us. And also there were other customers who needed to put in place plans which were not planned for earlier. And so they wanted new orders to be expedited. And so we in turn had to work with our vendors again to expedite those. So that was a set of revised priorities and all that we had to work out both with our customers and with our vendors. But you also, it comes with a caveat. You can ask for your support from your vendors, but then you also need to ensure that you pay your bills on time, that you do not just ask for help, but you also provide help when it's required. And there were many of our vendors where we actually paid our bills early, before they were due, just to ensure, because we knew that just as we had cash flow issues as a result of the crisis, that they would have cash flow issues as well. There was a lot of issues going on with GST compliances. So that's something which many of our smaller vendors have been struggling with. So so we tried to see how we could actually help them with the compliances, trying to see that they would file their returns, all of that, such that they in turn could continue to supply to us, where we would be able to claim credits and in turn pay their bills as well. And then besides vendors and customers, you deal with other businesses as well. And particularly, I think we have a responsibility in our ecosystem that we function. There are many other businesses that exist. And we had a few of them who we were aware of, and very simple things. I mean, we had, there's a small business which produces healthy food. And obviously they were also very deeply affected. Their kitchens were in the heart of Bombay, in Worli, which was one of the worst affected in the early days of the lockdown. And so we found a way to help them by placing an advance, giving them an advance, and saying, well, listen, whenever you are able to start again, supply X number of packages of healthy foods, which we can then, pass on to our members, our own employees, as a thank you for their contribution during this particular crisis. And so it was a kind of win-win thing, very small gesture, but it helped the small business, to pay their salaries, at least for a couple of months. And we were able to also reward our own members with a small thank you gift. So small things like that, these are all easy wins for us, and I think these are things which, if we keep our eyes open, we will see many who we can help in small ways, which can be very impactful for keeping other people employed and other people in business. And finally, the community. The community in which we operate, you cannot ignore. And during this crisis, which we had, there were a number of people who, living in that community, were deeply affected. There were many migrants who were actually still there. So in terms of feeding them, I think we were asked by the local municipal corporation if they could use our canteens, if we could provide meals. So we provided about 1,000 meals a day for about 20 days, which was then distributed through the local municipal corporation authorities. We provided sort of rations, again through an NGO that we were working with. So these are small things which cost something, but actually is our responsibility as an organization to the community that we operate in. Finally, I'd like to just end with a few lessons from this crisis. Two lessons, actually. One was, it was very clear that where we had established trust, there was significant mutual benefit and advantage. So as I said, We certainly saw it with our employees. We saw it with our vendors and customers. We saw it also with the community in which we live in. So it was very clear that where we had the trust, it was very much a two-way benefit. But the second is that there were also clear examples of where there was no trust. And that's where we see the breakdown. And that's where you see it very much at the macro level. If you look at trust between central government and state government and local government, where political considerations outweighed doing the logical and the right thing. Instead of listening to medical experts, scientists, and epidemiologists, we had sort of high-handed directives which were being taken, decisions which were being taken, sometimes with political considerations, with personal agendas in mind. And I think you see the effect of that between local government, the medical community, between the medical community and citizens at large, and the media as well. We've seen lots of articles in the media as well about, reading about, well, hospitals are overcharging, they're not offering beds to people. But at the same time, maybe a few cases existed, but we know that many of our hospitals were doing a wonderful job in serving the communities, in keeping people safe. And our medical workers had to work under extremely difficult conditions during the height of the crisis. So we clearly, you see when there was a breakdown, you see things not working out well. And the example and the result was that we paid the price by having 7.5 million positive cases in the country. It's the second highest in the world after the US, where incidentally, that's another country where there was a complete breakdown of trust and extreme politicization and polarization, including on simple issues on whether one should wear a mask or not. And you see that, when you have that, these countries have not done well. Whereas you see other countries where there has been cooperation, there has been respect for the knowledge of scientists and epidemiologists and the medical community, where they seem to have dealt with the crisis a lot better. So whether it's Germany, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Taiwan, Korea, these are all examples of places where I think there was a much greater level of trust amongst all the stakeholders at the macro level. The crisis is far from over, and we need to recognize that active cases can spike again. Things are much better in the last couple of weeks, and we hope that it stays that way. But if we do not get the health situation under control, the economic revival that we're all hoping for cannot occur. And if you look at the economic situation we are in, we expect this year that our GDP will fall 10%, and 10% compared to a growth of 4% that we were predicting. So we're actually looking at a 14% change in our GDP in the country this year. That's the worst of any large economy in the world today. And for us to recover this, even if things go well, it will take us 2 years to get to where we were before the pandemic. So we have to recognize that that's a 2-year gap that we will have in recovering to where we were before this. And that's if we get the health situation under control. If we have another case where we get a second wave, as what's happening in Europe today, and you're seeing in some states of the United States as well, that will create massive problems for us going forward. So we need to see that we work in a different way going forward, while dealing with this health crisis. And I think it's up to all of us to try and build those bridges of trust with some of the other stakeholders in society such that we can do better. So I'm going to stop there, and then Professor Mani, if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to take them, and we can have an open discussion. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, sir. That was truly inspirational and came straight from the heart. And we were very, very pleased to listen to all those little things which made so much of an impact, which you attempted both at the individual level and at the organization level. Obviously, there are a couple of questions which I'm going to start sharing with you, sir. The first question that comes is, you did speak about the fact that we have to demonstrate authenticity. Now, in the initial stages, till we build trust, would you share some stories or some examples of how you can build this authenticity?
Sure. I'll go back again to the crisis which we've been dealing with, and I think the first questions which came initially from some of our employees was in the months of April and May, when all activity stopped. We literally could not invoice anything. No one could come to work. And obviously the concern is that how long can this go on? And how long can we survive with this kind of a situation? And so there were many questions which came up that way during that time. And how do you answer a question like that when they say, well, how long will this go on? And that's the first question people ask us. And you can only say you don't know, because we didn't know. We didn't have the answer. And the first lockdown, as you know, was for 3 weeks, but then that 3 weeks was extended by 2 more weeks, and then it was extended again by another month. And that's how it went. So we had to be honest and say, well, we just don't know. But at the same time, you can hope for the best. So you plan for, as we always say, you plan for the worst, but you hope for the best. And there was a lot of opportunity for us. And I'll tell you, even in those initial days of the lockdown, we were still able to collect a significant amount of cash, because these were from invoices which were already made for supplies which had already been made to customers. And so we were able to engage with our customers remotely using electronic communication and video conferences, which we suddenly had to learn overnight. And by doing so, we were really able to collect what was due to us. And we had excellent collections during those initial days of the lockdown as well. And we would share that with people. We would share that with, let people know that, listen, this is what we've collected as a result of your efforts. And that makes people feel good. It gives people confidence. So that's an example of how you can be authentic.
Fine. Would you also share with us, based on your experiences, was it more easy to convince the blue collar workers to come back to work or the white collar workers?
Actually, we don't make a distinction between the two, honestly. And everyone is actually the same. So whether it's, someone who works in the office, someone who works on the shop floor, it was really very much need-based. So initially we said, we just wanted our manufacturing people to be at work, because we said we did not want to have to deal with having to keep everybody safe. You can keep a smaller number of people safe, but having everybody there, even if you have shifts or people coming every alternate day, the more people you have to bring in increases the probability of infection spreading. And so as a result, we said, those of you who can work at home, you must stay at home and you must work from home and figure out how you can do your best working from home. We'll provide you with all the support, all the tools you need, but you must stay home. At the same time, the people who had to work in manufacturing, and it's not blue collar or white collar, but those who had to be there, including some of the support people for them, they had to come to work. And we just tried to keep them as safe as possible, make them as comfortable as possible, and essentially do that. Yeah.
All right. So it was, as you said, in some other context, it was building the confidence in them that even if they do come to work, they are being completely taken care of.
That's right.
All right, sir, you mentioned something about how you went beyond your brief to even support the vendors who were in long relationships with the company, even in these difficult times. Can you share some more inputs and stories about the same, please?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, it was more in terms of, firstly, engaging with them, communicating with them. So we had a couple of interactions with some of our key vendors where we explained where we stood. We also asked for help and support from them, but also tried to see that we could help them in terms of if they had issues that they were dealing with, that we could help them with that. So whether it was payment issues, whether it was helping them with their own cash flow, that kind of thing. One of the things that we really tried to also see is to see how we could help them on their GST compliance. So I think that was also an important element, which was a necessary thing for particularly smaller vendors.
Did you encounter any problems in convincing families to let their spouses go to work?
Very much.
If so, would you share how you managed to handle that?
Very much. That was very much an issue. Very much an issue. And I think yes, we had some programs where our company doctor, we had programs where he talked to our family members as well. So it was not just our employees, but also spoke to some of the spouses. And I think that's where, when you can demonstrate with authenticity, when a family has an issue, when a family, in a family, of course, we've had positive cases, obviously, in a city like Pune, which had, we were adding close to 5,000 cases a day at the peak. You're going to have people who are going to be affected in the company as well. And so consequently, you have to engage with those people and make sure that you demonstrate to them that you're helping them in terms of, firstly, ensuring that if they need to be isolated, how are they going to be isolated? If they need help in terms of hospitalization, how are we going to help them find hospital beds? And ensuring that we keep in touch with the family day to day while they were in the positive situation for the health situation. So whether it was the family member or whether it was the employee, we would track on it, and we still do, we track on a day-to-day basis for each of the cases that are there. Okay, so I think that's where the family feels that they're very much a part of this whole crisis. And it's not that it's only the employee who we have interest in, but it's the family that is equally important.
All right. So would you also throw some light on how you manage to empower the employees to work from home? For many of them, this might be the first time ever they were doing it. So could you throw some light on that area also, sir?
Yeah. So the first thing was, firstly, providing them with the tools, because many of us have laptops, many of us work from home, have been working, in the evenings at home, etc. And we were equipped, but there were many who were not. And so we had to make sure that we suddenly had to rent computers. We had to get computers delivered to them, and all of this during the height of the lockdown, when there was restriction of movement of people, but somehow or the other we managed, in that. So essentially providing them with the tools such that they were equipped to work, also ensuring that someone who had a police pass would go and collect documents from them if was required, deliver to others. So that's the kind of thing which had to be done during that initial time. But we also had to do a few things to keep them mentally happy. And so we have yoga classes, for example. We have 3 times a week, we have yoga classes, which is open to everybody, whoever wants to join. There are other, forms of virtual kind of entertainment things that we are doing, things like that. So these are the ways you have to adapt. You have to adapt to the situation.
All right, here is a question that comes with an apology, but I'm nevertheless reading it out to you. Would you share with us whether you reduced manpower or cut salaries during the last 6 months?
Yeah, it's a good question. We did not reduce manpower, and we still have not reduced manpower. But this is again something where, the aspect of authenticity and transparency comes in. And so what we did instead was we talked to our members and we said, what we have to do is that we have to ensure that our cash position is safe. And cash position being safe means that we are in a position to meet all our obligations. Obligations meaning pay all our vendors, pay for materials that have been supplied to us, pay all our taxes that are due, and also pay our salaries. But what we did do, and what is still in place, is we did a salary deferment. We did not do a salary reduction. We did a salary deferment. So right at the initial stage in Q1, we did this looking at, we reduced, we sort of deferred to a larger extent the people who had higher salaries, and on a sliding scale to those who had the lowest salaries, there was no deferment at all. So we deferred the salary. We set aside the amount that we saved. We did not spend that money. We actually set it aside in a separate account. And then our thought was that if things would revive and things, would be more stable, we would pay the deferred amount, and we would restore the deferred amounts to the normal levels. End of Q1, things were as uncertain from an economic point of view. But from a cash point of view, the organization was in a reasonably strong position. We had met all our obligations. And so what we did is whatever that deferred amount was, we paid it at the end of Q1. Okay. The same thing was done in Q2. So we deferred again some part of the salaries in Q2. And at the end of Q2, again, since the situation was fine, we paid that deferred amount. So as of now, as the first 6 months of the year, everybody got their normal salary. Okay. Going forward, we're continuing the deferment, and we will see again at the end of Q3 and at the end of Q4 how things are. And if things are as they are, everyone will get their salaries as well.
All right. I think that must have been a very big confidence building measure that employees must have appreciated in great measure, because we've read so many stories of downsizing and salary reductions and so on. So that's wonderful to hear from you on that.
There is, I should just add a qualifier on that, and that is, on the one hand, we're saying this, that this is absolutely essential, but at the same time, there has to be that accountability for people as well, in terms of making sure that, they're able to contribute, they're able to deliver, and so far, that's been the case. There's never been an issue on that.
Well, I think that's how the trust has been built, and therefore it works well for both parties, as you were saying in some other context. Indrapalji, I've unmuted you. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, Mr. Forbes, that all that you mentioned is very deeply rooted in your values, if I may say so. So what has been the foundation of such values developing to such great depth in your company, in your organization?
Well, I think it goes back to the founder, who's our father, I think, who initially sort of established, essentially working with people. He always said, we should work with people such that relationships are preserved. So whether it's your own members, whether it's your partners that you work with, or whether it's your vendors and customers, and you have to just do the right thing. And doing the right thing means doing what is right, what your conscience tells you is the right thing to do. It's not what you read about, what some other organization does. You learn from what other organizations do, what other people do, but then you apply it in your own way, and you do what is right for yourselves. And so in the same way, what I'm saying here is, this is what works for us. It's not that everyone has to do this. You have to do what works for you. So that's all I can say.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I'd like to request Colonel Burby to tell us a little about ICB, Initiatives of Change in Business, for the benefit of all our members. You all are doing wonderful work, and this would be a great platform to share very briefly the kind of work that you do.
Thank you very much, Professor Mani. Thank you, all members of the Bombay Management Association, and a few from Initiatives of Change and Initiatives of Change for Business, and others as well on the call today. Initiatives of Change for Business is purposed on the belief, in fact, the conviction, that businesses can be competitive and successful by being ethical. And our conviction is drawn from practices on ground over the years, more so in contemporary times, where we see the true mettle of leadership tested in the hottest furnace, as it were. And we were extremely glad that Mr. Farhad Forbes was available and inclined to accept our invitation to connect Initiatives of Change for Business with Bombay Management Association. So, Initiatives of Change for Business is a program of a movement called Initiatives of Change, which actually took root sometime between the First and the Second World Wars, and the founder is Mr. Frank Bookman, and it's his ethos and philosophy which is actually the driving thoughts, values, and principles into this program. Initiatives of Change also has programs for education, for youth, for community at large, in giving them the philosophy that we need to be the change that we want to see. And it stems from a concept that we term as inner governance. And when we can govern ourselves from our conscience, as Mr. Farhad Forbes alluded to briefly in that question about values, I think we would be guided by the soul, and the soul connects to our forefathers and the inheritance, rich inheritance that we have come to be rewarded by. And I think it's our legacy to take this forward in more ways than one. Thank you, Professor.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Colonel, for facilitating this entire activity. It's been a wonderful learning experience for nearly 82 people who came in to attend this webinar on this platform. And I'm sure we are going back much, much more wiser. As they rightly say, all good things have to come to a pause at some point in time, and we move on to carry some of these memories and try to put it back into action. Before we wind up, I will have the last observation and question coming up from our past president, Mr. Ernest Fernandez. Over to you, sir.
Well, I'd like to comment that Mr. Forbes has not been looking at managing from the perspective of an owner, but from the perspective of a trustee. And what he has told us has been very much in line with the Gandhian concept of trusteeship. He has put that into practice. And I'm sure he must have been influenced by Mahatma Gandhi.
If I can respond to that, my father was born on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. So his birthday is also on the 2nd of October, and he was always his greatest idol. So I just want to mention that.
Wonderful. So thanks, Mr. Fernandez, for a very intuitive observation. And I think it just confirms how sometimes so many unconnected things could connect for the larger good of the community. I'm going to request my colleague on the executive committee of the Bombay Management Association, Vaijayanti, to make a few concluding remarks and propose the vote of thanks on all our behalf, after which we will have our group photograph, though on digital mode, to capture this moment that we spent together. So this time that Vaijayanti is going to propose the vote of thanks is for you to get ready for the group photograph, if I may say so. Over to you, Vaijayanti.
Good evening, everybody. I think we've had, a very heartwarming and a wonderful talk by Mr. Forbes. And, everybody talks about trust, values, authenticity, but the examples that you gave, really, it made it all come alive. And it's really in times of crisis, where we question everything, including the humanitarian response. I think with all your different examples, you've really told us the value of building trust, the value of being authentic, and of not shying away from saying that, I may not know all the answers, but we'll work on this together. I guess that's what the leadership of the future is going to be like, because I think the post-COVID world will continue to remain uncertain for some time to come. So thank you, Mr. Forbes, so much for coming and gracing the Wednesday Wisdom webinar. It has been truly enlightening. And there are several learnings that I'm taking away individually, and that would be the same for everybody on this webinar too. I also thank Mr. Burby for getting, doing this collaborative thing and getting somebody like Mr. Forbes to come and address us. So thank you to you also. All in all, a wonderful 1 hour and a very, very enriching one. So thank you all once again.
Thanks, Vaijayanti. I think you just expressed what was there in everybody's mind. Let's take this opportunity. As I said, please put on your cameras so that we can take a group picture. As many of you know, those who come regularly to these learning sessions, colleagues from the BMA Secretariat will do the honors. Today we have about 4 screens, so be a little patient so that we can complete the process of capturing your pictures along with us and Mr. Forbes. And while we do that, may I inform you that next Wednesday, our session is on the impact of COVID and post-COVID on the export-import trade. And this is being presented by the president of Albia, Mr. Jayant Lapsia. This Friday, we have a program on facilitation skills and how to cope with the changing scenario at an individual level. I'm also happy to share with you that November 1st week, we are organizing the Digital Leadership Summit of our Bombay Management Association. The link for the same I have just put into the chat box. You can click on it and preserve it so that you can have a look at it later. We'd also appreciate your feedback and suggestions, if any, for future topics in the chat box in the next couple of minutes. So we just wait for our green signal that we've taken the pictures. Some of you, your cameras are still not on. So we're going to just have your name printed across if you choose not to put on your cameras.
Done, sir. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you everybody, and very grateful to you, Mr. Forbes and Colonel Burby, for making this learning event happen. Do stay tuned with us, and we look forward to further collaboration as we proceed. Thank you everybody for joining us here this evening. Thank you, stay safe and stay blessed.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.